How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, I was scrolling through my YouTube algorithm, and when it's talking about the Nancy Guthrie case, there was a topic that I thought was pretty interesting. There was a dialogue, which I'm going to show you, Megyn Kelly with, what's his name? That lawyer, Garagos. Well, they're both lawyers. Just one was a former prosecutor, one was a defense attorney. Mark Garagos. We see him a lot with the TMZ guy. And then Matt Murphy. They were talking about if Savannah Guthrie or her family could take legal action against the media, particularly Ashleigh Banfield, and in regards to her putting out the information a while back that Tommaso Cioni, which would be Annie's husband, was a suspect. And I thought this dialogue with them was very interesting, but I thought that they missed a lot. And I'm not an expert in this area. I'm not. But I had a lot more questions that I want answered. And then when I was looking up the questions, there was a lot more that wasn't mentioned that I feel maybe I can provide another side of this dialogue. And it's just in fairness. So this one dialogue you're going to see right now is going to be very supportive of Ashleigh Banfield. And it makes sense because they know her, they're friends with her, they like her. So the dialogue is going to most likely lean more in favor towards Ashleigh, not as objective, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm not an expert. So I wanted to do this side of the argument in which the Guthrie family could push for a lawsuit. So we're going to do both angles. And if you watch this, which I'm going to show now, then you watch mine, you get a better picture objectively. I just had to ask a lot of questions. I'm not a lawyer, so I wasn't able to kind of learn this on the fly. I had to just keep on asking questions, but it built into a great narrative for me. So I'm happy. And I know there are a couple smaller updates. I know that they're saying that they believe that the suspect in this case, they may do it again. There also may be some more surveillance photos, maybe within the house or the surrounding part of the house. But just none of this is coming from official sources. So I wanted to really focus on this. So let's show you your dialogue first. This was on Megyn Kelly. This is an interesting dialogue, and this is what made me go ahead and go into my discussion. All right, here we go.
Speaking of the media, there's been a report now by Radar Online, but they're citing Rob Schuster, who's a British-American celebrity reporter and royal insider. He's a frequent guest of The Nerve and our pal Maureen, and he hosts his own show called Naughty But Nice. And he had reported this, and now Radar Online is reporting it as well, that Savannah Guthrie's family is actively exploring the possibility of legal action against our pal Ashleigh Banfield following Ashleigh's exclusive about the brother-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, who's married to Savannah's sister.
Now, by the way, so the moment they said it's our pal, Ashleigh Banfield, and they will say it later that they're close to her, I knew that there may be another side of this that we can cover. So that's what kind of motivated me to just see if there's another side, because I want to be objective and fair. So I think this presents one side good, and then I think I have the other side, at least enough to start a discussion.
Annie being, at that time, maybe, she said, the prime suspect in this case. Here's the reporting of February 3rd, SOT 28.
But they have towed Annie Guthrie's car. And there is some connection to Annie Guthrie's car and Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. That would be Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, age 50, from Tucson, Arizona, married to Annie P. Guthrie, Savannah's sister. And my law enforcement source tells me that Tommaso Cioni is the prime suspect in this case. Again, law enforcement source tells me that Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, married to Annie Guthrie, Savannah's sister, is maybe a prime suspect in this case. At the very least, let me tamp that down, because sometimes it's the first person you're looking at, not prime as in there's no one else. Okay. So let's be really mindful of that. When anything happens like this, familial abductions, the families looked at first, and Annie and or Thomas O'Cioni were the last people to see Nancy Guthrie at 9:45 at night. But it's very distressing to think that this law enforcement source is telling me that Thomas O'Cioni is maybe a prime suspect in this case at this point, and that the car belonging to Annie has been towed and impounded and is in evidence.
Now, I have not been able to confirm that the Guthrie family wants to sue Ashleigh Banfield, but I have confirmed that Savannah is livid about that report and definitely does not suspect her sister or her brother-in-law. Can you blame her? I mean, that's, of course, she loves her sister. I'm sure she loves her brother-in-law, and I'm sure she genuinely doesn't believe they had anything to do with it. All of us are in a different boat. We have to be more objective in assessing the possible suspects, the possible people connected with it, and law enforcement certainly does. And Ashleigh based this claim, Mark, on what she said a senior law enforcement source who had been a source for her for years, who she described as an impeccable source, told her. So do you think there actually it would be a defamation claim by the Guthries against Ashleigh Banfield?
Let me tell you what I would do if Savannah came into my office or called me and asked me that question. I would say, look, I know you're out of your mind about this. I know you can't believe that this is being reported, but the tape that we just watched together couldn't be more protected under the law. And there is no way any thought that you have about suing, any claim that you think you have is going to be met by, depending on the jurisdiction it's brought in, what's called an anti-SLAPP, which is a strategic lawsuit against. What that will do is it will freeze the case, and a judge, when he gets it or she gets it, is going to rule that you have no ability to pursue a claim that, as framed, by the way, Ashleigh framed it. It's dead on arrival, pun intended, in terms of any kind of legal action. There's no there whatsoever. Because you have the ability, number one, because you could find any judge who's looking at this, any lawyer who's involved is going to tell you, of course, they're looking at the family members. It would be malpractice not to, and that's exactly what Ashleigh said. Number two, the media is, as long as they are reporting and they have source protection, you're never going to be able to disprove what Ashleigh Banfield said. Source protection. This has been, by the way, Megan, one of the great frustrations when I'm trying a high-profile case. When a judge gags me and says, you, Mr. Garrigus, your team and the prosecution team, as lawyers, cannot comment on this case. This is attorney's eyes only on some discovery. Well, what ends up happening, the law enforcement leaks the information. How do I ever prove that? I can't, because there is source protection. So that source protection, which is robust, is always going to be a wall that you're never going to be able to climb over.
What would you tell a man who's been late to everything for 40 years?
Sorry.
About it, Matt. I mean, what if they did sue, saying this turned into a complete shit show where this poor guy who is a victim, as the sheriff said, when you do this kind of thing, somebody who, he may not be the prime suspect, he may actually be just a victim, who was a victim, had all this focus on him. I mean, everybody, yours truly, Brian Enton, everybody who's been in depth covering this story started talking a lot more about the brother-in-law as a result of that report. And if they say, we don't believe her law enforcement source, we think she made it up, or we think her law enforcement source ought to be sued as well because that was complete bullshit from the beginning that caused us to come under undue scrutiny, might they have a case?
Well, I think Mark's exactly right. We both dealt with this in California. It's called anti-SLAPP. I don't know what they would call it in Arizona, but basically, what did she say? She said he's a suspect. And so what did,
maybe the prime suspect.
Yeah, what exactly is that? He was the last person to see her. That's not Ashleigh's fault. And full disclosure, I really like Ashleigh Banfield.
Same.
I know her personally. I think
And she's a
a great
solid
journalist.
reporter.
She's a solid reporter. And what she's doing is she's reporting what a source told her. She doesn't say he did it and here's why. She says, I've got information from a law enforcement source who says he is a prime suspect. And even though we've heard that, I think there's even TV shows called Prime Suspect at one point or another. What exactly does that mean? What is a suspect? A suspect means it's somebody that the police are looking at that they suspect, is right there in the word, might have done it. And the entire world is a suspect in a whodunit like this. And Mark's right. It goes nowhere. These are incredibly emotional situations for the family. Wouldn't be the first time that Radar Online has been radically wrong. But again, going back to what Mark said originally, and I think he's exactly right, all roads lead back to the sheriff.
Remember, though, so in all fairness, we want to just, I'm not an expert here, but in the discussion that Ashleigh had, or whatever her show, she said prime suspect. So that doesn't pull him with all other suspects as what would normally be the routine. We get it. We talked about this on the show before. You're going to go with the closest people to Nancy. At that point, they all could be suspects. It's the word prime. It kind of pulls him out a little bit, and I think that would be where some of the concerns are. I think Savannah would expect everybody that's close to Nancy would be a suspect. But we're talking about the connection of the word prime to it, which adds a little something more to it.
If this is a leak from his shop, it's kind of rich that the guy who brought the media in, his department is leaking information. I mean, it could be the FBI, but still it's his show. He wanted to be at the helm of the ship. He's responsible for that at the end of the day. And I had a great quote once on a high-profile case I was working on where high-placed people in the Orange County Sheriff's Department kept leaking information under an old sheriff who actually wound up going to federal prison that Mark knows all about. They kept leaking information on my Samantha Runyon case and was driving everybody.
So I do like how they say that she said nothing wrong. So I get it. But then they point to, well, if she did say something wrong, it's not her fault. It's the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the lead or the sheriff. So it's pushing into the blame side of things. At the end of the day, either she said something she shouldn't have said, or she's good. You know, you
pretty crazy. And my old boss pulled me in and he said, leaks are like ghosts. They seem really scary at first. At the end of the day, they'll never hurt your case. And chasing them is like chasing ghosts. You're never going to catch one. Nobody's ever going to admit it. But at the end of the day, who is responsible for the integrity of this investigation? It's the same sheriff that's complaining about it. I think Mark's right. It goes nowhere. I would also counsel them, you know, this is a terrible situation you're in. You're very emotional. Of course, they're going to look at everybody in the family. This is not a hill to die on, guys, because it's not going to go anywhere. They would lose, in my opinion. And then it winds up, they're even more brokenhearted because now, in addition to all the horror that they're experiencing, they can throw a tanked lawsuit on top of all that. I would give them.
But you have two things. First of all, you have the fact that he was the last person to see her alive, and also they towed the car that he and Annie Guthrie drive, and it's remained in police custody this entire time. In fact, just yesterday, Brian Enton reported that they may be getting ready to release that car back to them, and they searched their car in the dark of night with flash bulbs going off, or they were photographing a bunch of stuff. Like, the media would have asked itself whether these two were under scrutiny by law enforcement from day one, as soon as we found out that they towed that car, which happened to be the same day that she said Tommaso was a prime suspect at the time. It's like, this was coming with or without Ashleigh Banfield. And the other thing, Matt, is if they did, let's say they said, we don't care, we're suing anyway. I got to be honest, it's kind of a dream for a person in Ashleigh's situation, because then I get all sorts of discovery from you on whether what I said is true. Now
I have a challenge on that too. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but I'll present another side to that, and then you guys be the judge.
Now I'm really going to get up in your business and find out everything law enforcement knows about whether you in fact may have done this. Yeah,
I hope they don't go down that road. I really do. It'd be a tragic distraction to all of this.
Think about this.
So he never agreed to what she just said about the discovery part. I don't know if that's 100%, but I could be wrong. I'm not an expert here, guys. I'm not a lawyer. I had to do my own little research here. Let me just give a backdrop here. So Nancy Guthrie, Savannah Guthrie's 84-year-old mother, disappeared in Arizona, what authorities have described as a suspected abduction. Because Savannah is a national TV anchor, the case immediately drew intense media attention. Ashleigh Banfield then did exclusive true crime coverage, saying an impeccable, high-level law enforcement source told her that Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, was or may be the prime suspect, and that a family car had been towed and was in evidence. Days later, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly pushed back, saying they had no suspect or person of interest, and calling it really kind of reckless to report that someone is a suspect when they could very well be a victim. Savannah's family is reportedly considering legal options, and the case has become a flashpoint for questions about defamation, source use, and responsible true crime reporting. So I thought this was very interesting because there's stuff that I'm doing now. So I definitely think that this is something that I thought was interesting to report on. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about this. I never heard of SLAPP, anti-SLAPP. So there's a lot of stuff I had to look up. And this is more to open to discussion, but I will provide the other side. So I'm gonna do this for Savannah's side and present why I think it actually could be worth giving it a shot. Because I think in the long run that could affect how someone's reputation, just because we have a hunch. And I think there has to be some control on that. The freedom of the press, I get it, but sometimes that freedom, for them, I think it carries a sense of entitlement sometimes. So when there's a defamation claim, so this is what I'm learning here, guys. So let's say Savannah Guthrie family put a defamation claim for what Ashleigh Banfield said on her show. Because again, a lot of attention went to Tommaso Cioni, right? So he was listed not just a suspect, because a suspect, as I said, would be grouped in the pool, but rather a prime suspect, right? So to win a defamation case, there's a couple of things. The Guthrie family would need to prove all 5 elements. The first element is a false statement of fact. They must identify specific statements Banfield made as factual claims and show they're false. Here, that likely means statements such as he is the prime suspect, or my law enforcement source tells me he is the main suspect, if in reality law enforcement did not treat him as a suspect. The sheriff's public statement, we don't have anyone identified as a suspect, conflicts directly with the prime suspect, framing and supports the argument that an ordinary viewer would see her statement as factually wrong. About the plaintiff, the statement must be of and concerning the person who sues. Banfield explicitly identified Savannah Guthrie's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, and tied him to prime suspect language. That clearly satisfies the about the plaintiff requirement if he brings the claim. So it's the Guthrie family. Published to a third party. Publication means sharing the statement with someone other than the subject. Banfield aired these claims on her show and in clips and posts across platforms, so publication is obviously met many times over. And causing reputational harm. So this is damages. So the statement must seriously harm reputation, causing others to think worse of the person, fear them, or see them as criminal. Repeatedly describing someone as a prime suspect in his elderly mother-in-law's disappearance is classic reputational harm. The fact that rumors about him being under investigation or blockaded spread shows that real damage occurred. Then this is where it's unique. It talks about fault, negligence versus actual malice, and the reputation buffer idea. I wanted to add the reputation buffer idea, by the way. It's a question I asked that when the answer was generated, I said, you know what, I want to explore this a little more. So the key is what level of fault he has to prove, which depends on whether he's treated as a private figure or a public limited purpose public figure. So private figure would equate to negligence and no buffer from an existing public reputation. So if Tommaso is treated as a private figure, the fault standard is negligence or carelessness. So in this context, negligence could include leaning on a single unnamed impeccable law enforcement source to name a private son-in-law as prime suspect without independent corroboration. Ignoring the sheriff's public statements that there is no suspect and that calling someone a suspect could be reckless and harmful. Because I believe that after the sheriff had said there wasn't considered a suspect and said it was reckless, they continued to go and back up their story. Now that's a concern, I think. So when they went ahead and said, the sheriff came out and said, hey, we don't have no viable suspects, whatever it is, they still continued to kind of back up their story just to kind of keep her credible. And I think that becomes a concern because now you have the main lead, the main investigator, the lead law enforcement saying, hey, he's not a suspect, but then they're more worried about maintaining their perspective of the story, so they still defend it. And then failing to significantly adjust or correct her prime suspect framing after the public warning, as I just mentioned. So a private figure like Tommaso has no pre-existing public reputation for the audience to weigh against this accusation. For most viewers, the very first time they hear Tommaso Cioni is as Savannah Guthrie's son-in-law, the prime suspect, with no prior widely known public identity, no public reputation as a judge, entertainer, community leader, etc., to counteract that image. So the accusation doesn't bump into an existing reputation. It creates his reputation. There is no reputation buffer to absorb the blow. So if a court treats him as a private, figure, then E becomes, was it careless to let his first wide public introduction be prime suspect based on one anonymous source in the face of the sheriff's public denial? So given those facts, a judge could reasonably find negligence. I want to mention that this is where my questions were coming through here. If I'm being introduced to the public, I am a private figure, and now I'm being introduced to the public as the person who abducted my mother-in-law, then that's all people know me as. That's my reputation. I'm not up in the limelight. I don't have any other reputation. This is who they see initially. If I'm already in the limelight, I already have a bit of a reputation. Plus, when you're in the limelight, you kind of know that you're going to, you put yourself in the public. You weren't brought into the public. You put yourself into the public eye. So then you got to be wary that, hey, things could be said against me or for me, and it could make or create a reputation for me or give a bad reputation for me, whatever it is. But you put yourself in the public spotlight, and that's pretty much a known consequence of putting yourself in the public spotlight. It's when you're brought into the public spotlight from a private life. And yes, this was a big case. Nancy Guthrie was abducted, and it took off from the media. But the media brought these people, or at least brought Tommaso Cioni, who we never knew much of, Annie, whatever, into the spotlight when they started covering that story. And I find it hard that they could bring someone into the spotlight, give them that limited celebrity, that limited spotlight, and then use that as a defense to say, well, they are a limited public figure, and therefore this is just the outcome of that. And I would disagree with that. I think that he was brought into the spotlight during this case, and because that's how he's initially introduced to the world as someone that could have abducted Nancy Guthrie without no other reputation to balance that, doesn't have access to a PR rep, none of that, and he didn't put himself in the spotlight willingly. I think that could become a concern. I think that could become something that could be defamation, because that means I could just pull you into the spotlight and then just do whatever I want with you, even though you have a private life. No, that's unfair, because then you can lean on the fact, well, sorry, he was in the public because of the crime. No, because you pulled him into the public spotlight. Wasn't in the public spotlight. This was an investigation that, yes, they could handle a little bit better, but let's be honest. There's faults all around here, including the media. Media is not 100% in the clear. It's not Pima County. Yeah, they're not the best. But there's a whole mess of things that happen here in collaboration that I think you can't just put on Pima County either. So now we go to public or limited purpose public figure, actual malice, and an existing public reputation. So in the first part, if it's private, it's more about negligence. Like, did you cross your T's, dot your I's? This is the person being a public figure, or they say limited purpose public figure, which he could fit it, but he was brought into it. So it's funny how the media could bring somebody in and then maybe protect themselves by saying he's limited public. Yeah, but you brought him into the light. So if instead a court treats the plaintiff as a public figure or limited purpose public figure, the standard is actually malice, which means she either knew the statement was false or had serious doubt about whether it was true and said it anyway. But here's the question, how it changes now. Did Banfield basically think this might not be true and still run it because it was a powerful story? So public figures come in with an existing public reputation, which can act as a buffer. People have prior impressions that may soften the impact of false statements, and then the greater access to media and PR, giving them more ability to respond and correct the record. Because they chose that spotlight and can fight back more easily, the law demands that they prove actual malice, not just carelessness. Banfield's team would likely argue that within the Nancy Guthrie disappearance controversy, Tommaso has become a limited purpose public figure because he is central to a widely discussed public story. But then it's about why she brought him into the spotlight matters. It says your point is he didn't start as a public figure. That was it's responding to my question. So your point is he didn't start as a public figure with the reputation. She made him visible. Before this, he appears to have been unknown to the general public, a poet, teacher, and family member, not publicly recognized personality. He did not voluntarily step forward to shape the public narrative. This visibility is a byproduct of coverages like Banfield. And her reporting didn't just discuss a pre-existing public figure, it helped create his public identity. And that identity is potential prime suspect. Courts are cautious about letting a defendant manufacture public figure status by accusing someone and then use that status to make the plaintiff's job harder. That supports treating him as a private, not public. So there's a question here was, in this situation, is there realistically a viable defamation case? And is Tommaso better seen as a private figure or a limited purpose public figure? All right, there is a plausible defamation case on elements A through D, which we talked about, right? Let me just see the false statement of fact about the plaintiff published to a third party causing reputational harm or damage. We know that. The E part is the tough part. So there's a plausible defamation case on elements A through D. The real battle is E, which is the private figure versus the public or the limited purpose person, limited person figure. So the real battle is E. Given that Tommaso had no prior public reputation and was effectively introduced to the public as a prime suspect by Banfield, the stronger argument is that he remains a private figure. Under that view, a court could find that naming him as a prime suspect based on a single anonymous source in direct tension with the sheriff's public denial was negligent towards a private person with no reputation buffer. It's not guaranteed, but it's serious but it is a serious non-frivolous case. I want to mention, so remember, even what she said the first time was very tentative. I get it. But then when the sheriff came up and said it was rather reckless, I believe they came on afterwards and started defending their perspective. Maybe, but it's an impeccable source. But they didn't give up after the lead investigation. The Pima County, who would be considered the lead, said it's reckless reporting. We have no suspects at this time. Obviously, the family is always going to be the closest. That's who they check. But once they came out and said that, instead of just saying, okay, we were wrong, sometimes they go back and defend their story because they want to, I guess, defend their integrity. And that could be a concern because now you're running with a narrative that that the lead investigator said we did not say that to be accurate. And even if it becomes accurate later on, it was not accurate at that time. And that matters, guys. I think that matters a lot. I didn't know what SLAP was, an anti-SLAP, so I had to look that up. And how's that shaped the battlefield? Because they talked about that a little bit. So quick history. So I had to look up SLAP. So the term SLAP is strategic lawsuit against public participation, and that emerged in U.S. legal scholarship in the late 1970s and 1980s when researchers noticed a pattern. Powerful developers, corporations, and officials were suing citizens, activists, and small media outlets for defamation or interference because they spoke out at public hearings and protested projects or criticized officials. So basically, people in power were upset that they were getting criticized. Citizens would probably speak their mind, and then the people in power were upset, so they would do this SLAP, kind of like a lawsuit, right? And then what would happen is they created an anti-SLAP. So it's like pretty much I can say it, and you can't stop me. These suits often had weak legal merit, but strong intimidation effects, and the process, lawyers, deposition, years in court was the punishment. So basically, you keep saying that to me, I'm going to sue you for defamation of character. And that would stop people from saying stuff because they would be scared. So now people become more censored. In this case, the bigwigs get more protected because people are afraid of lawsuits. But then eventually someone came up and said, hey, we got to help them because they're not able to speak their mind and they're being threatened by this SLAP, which would be turned into a lawsuit. So in response, states started adopting anti-SLAP statutes, many in the 90s and 2000s, to protect people who spoke on public issues. Zoning, environment, local corruption, public safety, from being crushed by retaliatory lawsuits. So basically, I speak my mind to the bigwig. They threaten to sue me, defamation. I get nervous. So now people said, hey, they're not, that's unfair. You can't do that. It's a threat. So now we'll create an anti-SLAP. So now you go ahead. When they threaten you with that, you do the anti-SLAP. And then basically, you could speak your mind. You aren't censored because they threatened to do a lawsuit. It's kind of like a coercive threat, technically. So the history matters here because the original hero in SLAP stories was usually the little guy criticizing power, not a national anchor or TV host. So I thought when they said that she could do SLAP, the original villain was the powerful entity trying to silence criticism, not a missing person's family. So this was kind of reversed, right? So basically, the Megyn Kelly, Mark Garagos, whatever it is, the other gentleman, basically, they're trying to put in that Savannah Guthrie is kind of doing a SLAP lawsuit, and that basically Ashleigh could do the anti-SLAP. Ashleigh is the one that would kind of be the victim, and I don't think that's the case here. I don't think that's the case here. I think they're kind of putting it in there trying to equate these two. But I don't think that's the issue because it wasn't really meant to protect reporters who could be giving out false information. It was to protect people from being retaliated against. So I guess it is used in this context. But if you look at how it originated, it was really originated to protect people from being retaliated against. Again, I say something to you, you're a more powerful figure, you threaten a law, sue me, so I stop speaking until someone says, hey, listen, they're retaliating. It's like kind of like a whistleblower. They're threatening you with a lawsuit, not a problem. We'll put an anti-SLAP on that. A SLAP is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. A lawsuit, often defamation, filed primarily to intimidate or punish someone for speaking about a public issue, not necessarily to win on a legal merit. The aim is to make speaking out expensive and scary and to warn others, if you talk like this, you'll end up in court. What are anti-SLAP laws? Anti-SLAP laws give defendants a special early tool to fight back. If you are sued over speech about a public issue, you can file a special motion asking the court to recognize the suit as targeting public issue speech and make the plaintiff quickly show they have real evidence and a strong chance of winning. If they can't, the court can dismiss the suit early and make the plaintiff pay the defendant's legal fees. So anti-SLAP flips the script. Weak public issue lawsuits can blow back on the person who filed them. Now, remember, Mark is a defense lawyer, so sometimes they look for like these loopholes that can help benefit them in cases. And maybe he saw lap with the slap thing, and it really should apply here, but he felt, hey, maybe this could apply here, which maybe they've done in the past. I don't know. I didn't go that deep into the research, but I don't think slap kind of equates to what Savannah Guthrie and her family are trying to do. They're not trying to shut people up for the sake of, it's not about us not wanting to hear what you want to say. It's what you're saying that we have a problem with, and then use the anti-slap as, well, they're retaliating against me for saying this. No one's retaliating against you. You're putting out information that is not truly accurate and could be defamatory towards her family right now when they're going through a rough time. I really don't believe this really is a anti-slap thing. But again, I'm not a lawyer. And again, I'm only going based on what the context here is. And it really just wasn't introduced within that context. But who knows, as time travels, as time progresses, people take these laws, bastardize them, and they wind up going far away from their original purpose anyway. This was a law that people put in to bully. And then the anti-slap was to stop that, stop the retaliatory, stop retaliating. So if I want to say something, I could say something and then not be afraid of you pushing out the lawsuit just to censor me. That's totally different than what she's trying to do here. So I would think so. I don't think the concerns equate. So how this could work here is Banfield would argue, if it does go into this issue, I was speaking about a major public crime investigation and public safety, classic public issue speech. In a state with a strong anti-slap protection, she could file an anti-slap motion. If sued, that would put normal discovery on hold, force the Guthrie to show early that they're likely to prove not just falsify, but also fault, negligence, or actual malice, and potentially get the case thrown out quickly and shift her legal fees to the family if they can't meet that showing. So basically, if they can't meet the defamatory, then Savannah Guthrie now has to pay for the lawyers that would be represented by Ashleigh Banfield, that would have represented Ashleigh Banfield. The only thing here is, I think once the sheriff made his remark and said that there are no suspects at this time, in their effort to continue to defend the story, which I believe they did, that's where it starts to become a problem for me. And that's where I would focus. Because maybe the first part's very tentative, I get it. I just don't like the word prime suspect, so I would focus on prime. But the second part is, hey, the sheriff came out, this is what they said, and yet you still continue to defend your narrative. I think that could be where a concern could be, that Savannah Guthrie could be within her right to at least make the effort. So that doesn't change what definition is, but it radically changes when the family has to demonstrate the strength of their case and how much financial risk they take on. So the ethical tension, now this is in light of history. If you overlay the history on this case, originally anti-slap laws were about protecting citizens and small media who criticize the powerful. Here the roles are flipped. The potential defendant is a well-known host, and the potential plaintiffs are private family and an unaccused son-in-law. It's a role reverse. So the law that was built to protect the little guy for speaking out against power is now part of the shield for a powerful media figure when a private family says you went too far. That doesn't mean the law is wrong. It just shows how complicated these tools become once they're in the real world. So the question has, does anti-slap mean the Guthrie family basically can't sue? And I want to say no. They can sue. Anti-slap doesn't bar filing. It raises the stakes. If they sue, Banfield can move quickly to force an early test of their evidence. If a judge decides their case isn't strong enough, especially on fault, the suit could be dismissed early and the family might be ordered to pay her fees. And that makes suing a higher risk decision, but not so much for Sandra. I'm sure she has the money for that. But given the history of slap laws, is this their classic use, or has the tool been shifted? And guys, I've seen it. I've seen tools with good intent get bastardized because people aren't aware of yes, it's in good intent, but how people could misuse it. And you see it all the time being misused. And you could see it be misused by defense lawyers too, in an effort to aid their client when they look for loopholes. Historically, slap and anti-slap were about citizens and small outlets versus powerful interests. In that sense, using anti-SLAPP here, where the speaker is powerful and the potential plaintiffs are private, it's not the classic story. Legally, though, the statutes are written broadly to cover speech or public issues, so a case like this still fits their scope. That's why you can argue both that law is doing what it was written to do, but the power dynamics are very different from the original SLAPP battles. So again, I thought that's where. So there is some complication here, right? So we got a little more to cover, but I just want to mention something. I do like the private figure versus the limited public purpose figure, or just a public figure itself. That E category, I think that's something that. I mean, if we're debating it here, it's definitely, if you want to sue, it's a good argument. I mean, using SLAPP, anti-SLAPP, all this other stuff. I don't know if Savannah even sees this as SLAPP, would she even know that's what it is? I think it's just more about defamation, and then just go from there. This is what was said, and it continued to be said after the lead investigator made a public announcement saying that this wasn't true, and then they went and continued to verify or validate their story. I think that is good. I think that's a good foundation. I want to talk about confidential sources versus accountability. So why confidential sources matter. So confidential sources are critical for exposing corruption and misconduct, especially inside law enforcement and government. If courts routinely force disclosure, many insiders won't risk speaking, and some abuses would never be exposed. That's why there is a strong tradition of protecting journalists who decline to reveal sources, even in defamation cases. But here's the catch-22 here, which you guys already probably know. To prove fault, especially actual malice, plaintiffs often need to know who the source was, how reliable they were, and what they actually said. If the source remains secret, it becomes extremely difficult to prove that the reporter knew or strongly suspected the story was false. So we got the catch-22. The same protection that encourages whistleblowers can also shield sloppy or even non-existent sourcing. So how does that apply here, right? So Banfield says she had an impeccable high-level law enforcement source. If she refuses to identify them, the Guthries can't test the source's role, credibility, or exact statements. And Garrigo said that. It is harder to prove she acted with actual malice because the court can't see the full sourcing picture. So in a case like this is a question sent my way. Should one anonymous law enforcement source be enough to justify naming a private person as a suspect? Ethically, no. A single anonymous source, especially when the sheriff is publicly contradicting the claim, should not be enough to put a private person's name next to prime suspect. A responsible standard in true crime reporting is at least 2 independent, credible sources and no direct conflict with on-record official statements before naming a private individual as a suspect. So again, I may not be able, she could say impeccable law. I mean, she could pretty much, the news could make up any resource. And we've seen that with TMZ. So of course, someone like Garrigos would probably defend that. I get it. You know, you can't pull my sources. We're protected. But then you can be making up any source. How do we know you're not? We don't know. That's the hard part. So technically, I like the 2, but I like this last part here. It says that, but there should be no direct conflict with on-record official statements before you name a private individual. And as I mentioned, I mean, if you continue to defend the narrative, even though the main entity had said that's not true, they're not a suspect or not a prime suspect. I think that's what makes it different. Prime suspect. That word matters. Well, then now you went against what's officially on record, and I think that is a bit of a concern, right? Because you're going against what's already documented and on record. All right. So now discovery. How a lawsuit can boomerang on the family. I had to ask somebody this question. So what a discovery is. So discovery is the lawsuits phase where both sides can demand documents, messages, and testimony that might be relevant. Like phones, emails, social media, family group chats, financial records, police notes, and more. Now, this is what Megyn Kelly had mentioned. And then the one guy, he never really answered her. Made it look like he did, but he never really agreed with her because I think when she said that, oh, this would open up a great thing for a discovery. I don't see that as the case, but again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'll give you a perspective on that. So the usual concern. So in many defamation cases, especially when there are real suspicions about a plaintiff, discovery can be incredibly invasive. The defendant's lawyers dig through years of communications, looking for anything that supports their story, motive, opportunity, inconsistencies, because they're defending a claim that the plaintiff is connected to wrongdoing. That's why lawyers often warn potential plaintiffs, if you sue, you open your life. Now, here's the twist that I added. It goes, your twist. What if law enforcement never accused them? So I asked, well, wait a second. What about if they were never accused? So now this is actually it says it's a very smart counterpoint. It says here, you see where it says right there, I wanted to add a little bit of a twist here. So it says if he was never actually a suspect to law enforcement, why would a court need or allow deep invasive discovery into his life? That's an important distinction, right? So here the sheriff is on record saying Tommaso is not a suspect and that it was reckless to call him one. That means there is no ongoing criminal suspicion by authorities that would justify a fishing expedition into his life. So in that scenario, his lawyers can argue that discovery in a civil case should stay tightly focused on Banfield's conduct and sources, what she knew, who told her what, when she learned of the sheriff's denial, not of combing through the private life. And that's crazy how it's just more about, in my mind, could be more about entitlement. I sue, right? And now you want my information, but I'm suing you for what you've done, and you're not going to give me your sources. You're not going to give me nothing, and all I'm going to do is give you what I have. So that's another, in my mind, when she said that could be some sort of coercive threat. So in the effort to sue, I got to give you all my information, but you're protected and you don't got to give me any because you're protected under confidential sources. That's unfair. Why do you need my information? I was never, let's say he was never a prime suspect. He was never considered one by the lead authority. So therefore, why do you need anything? Whatever this leak was, did you run that leak by someone official before you released it? Did you run it to make sure that it was truthful, or did you just run it just to run it? I get there's going to be leaks, and he even said, that's on them. You got to be careful with that too, because you don't really know where the leak came from. It said impeccable. It could be someone that's not even actually involved in the case, or it could be just made up. She didn't say a leak from within the sheriff's department, which is the head investigation, or a leak within the FBI. She just said it was a leak. Oh, well, she's protecting the source. Guys, you got to be more specific than that, though. I'm sorry. And at this point here, the protection of the source could be something else that they could fall on when it's, you challenge my integrity with that. I want to sue. Tell us who this, if I can't get you, tell me who the source is. I can't tell you the source. So we're just going to allow you to bastardize us this whole time because you got all these protections that at this point here are just being weaponized. In my extent, and it matters because we could be that family. What's happening to the Guthrie family, that could be happening to us too. And now that the first interaction the public is aware of, or they think about us, is that we abducted our mother-in-law. It's the first thing, and then there's no reputation I have to defend. I don't have public PR. I have nothing. So that's why I think it does become a concern, because at any moment you could be bastardized and not have a way to protect yourself. You're not in the public. It forces you into the public, but it forces you into the public in a very biased way. I mean, you also got to know your audience and how they could take the information you get. Somebody's going to follow true crime, maybe becomes a definite. And now that person's battling against obstacles that they're, one, that they didn't create, but two, they're never going to defeat, because that initial impression is extremely powerful. And I think that has to be noted in these lawsuits. And I think that's why initial impressions are extremely, extremely powerful. And when I have no reputation in the public's eyes, that's all they know about me. I have no way to challenge that. There's no buffer. So again, a judge, again, could limit the discovery to what's reasonably necessary to decide whether she defamed him. They don't have to open every corner of his personal history, especially when law enforcement never treated him as a suspect. I mean, think about this. Now we get a lawsuit, and then the media can automatically get a discovery of our investigation and what we have. That's insane. I'm going to show you he was a suspect. I need that discovery. Yeah, right. Hold off on that. Don't be a fool. I can't even picture that even being mentioned. I think that would, we're going to violate the integrity of an investigation because you said something and now you're demanding a discovery. Wow, does anything go to the side of the people doing the investigation or the family? It's like there's so much here that they could pretty much do it. It's like a carte de blanche. You know, now you come after me for defense. That's not a problem. Sure, come after me, and I'll request a discovery. I'll do that. So yeah, come after me. There's no way. There's no way that could be plausible. And if it's even mentioned, fight that. You got to fight that. So the question here was, if he was never a suspect to law enforcement, does a lawsuit really have to open the door to broad invasive discoveries into his life? Not necessarily. So in theory, any lawsuit opens some door to discovery, but in this kind of case, his lawyer could argue that wide-ranging discovery into his personal life isn't relevant, precisely because law enforcement never treated him as a suspect. A careful judge could limit discovery mostly to Banfield sourcing and editorial decisions, and could use protective orders to keep sensitive material out of the public's view. So my point was valid. It says, so your point is valid. The usual everything in your life will be exposed warning is less strong here than in case where police actually suspect the plaintiff. So I say this, you know what? You want to say something defamatory? Fine, we sue. And you're going to threaten me about the discovery? I'm going to threaten you to release your source. And right now the case is about your source. So if they're going to go in any direction that could mess with the rights of either one of us, then they better go the direction of the source, because that's the start of it all. So you want to threaten me with this, and I want the source. Tell me the source. We'll bring it into court. Tell me the source, and that would be my side of the lawsuit, because it just seems to be threatening back and forth with no effort to resolve here. Then you have protective reporting versus forced public figure status. I wanted to bring this back in for a second. So because remember, she could also say, well, he's in the public. The case is in the public. I get it, the case. They're bringing people in. So it's so unique to me that you could bring someone into the public spotlight and then hide behind it. Oh, they're a public figure because you brought him in. I haven't seen Tommaso go on TV once. He was brought in. So how she'll frame her actions. Banfield's defense story could be she was reporting on a highly newsworthy abduction case involving public safety and a well-known journalist. She had an impeccable high-level law enforcement source, again, an elected word, to validate their integrity. Impeccable law enforcement. It's key words to put more weight on the resource or the source, and then add unknown. See what I mean? I can't just say, you're not going to believe if I say an unknown source. I got to make sure impeccable and put some good qualifiers in there, and then unknown. Impeccable law, unknown. Yeah. She framed it in public interest terms, so investigators might be looking at why family members are scrutinized first and what the source says about the case. And that's fair. She put a context in there. Get it. Legal, this is her protected reporting narrative. She's not just gossiping. She's participating in public debate about a serious crime. Now, remember, once the sheriff and them had said, hey, this is not the case, she also put him as a prime suspect. I said that before. It's different than grouping them. And she singled him out. And then, after all that, you go ahead and what's my next part? I lost my train of thought here. It says about the case. Legally, this is a protected reporting narrative. She's not just gossiping. She's in public debate. Oh, but then again, after the sheriff says it, then you go in and continue to defend your narrative. And defend your narrative leaves him as the prime suspect, even after the lead had said that's not the case. That has to be looked into if they go that route. So legally, so the limited public scope move. So to strengthen that legal shield even more, her side may push hard on. Within this controversy, Tommaso is a limited purpose public figure. The argument goes like this. He's at the center of a major national story. People are widely discussing him and his role, and therefore he has become a public figure for purpose of this controversy and must prove actual malice instead of negligence. That's where it becomes different. Remember, the public thing is malice. It's different. It's doing it purposeful, but remember, it's subjective. It's subjective. If you look at what the terms were for a public figure or a purpose public figure, it's protected. It's like her knowing what she said wasn't right, but still doing it anyway. How do I prove that? How do I prove inside that she knew, but she still chose to do it anyway? The private figure has more protection. It's more negligence. It's not doing enough of your due process or your research and just releasing it and then going after that private citizen when there wasn't enough information to begin with. What one unknown source, that's not enough. This was not, that wasn't put up by the investigative authority. Sorry, you're in trouble because you should never said it. That's the negligence. But that's if it's a private figure. When it pushes into the public spotlight or limited public, now it's more of malice. And that's like just subjective. Knowing it was wrong and then doing it anyway. How do you prove that? It's just another protection. How do you prove that? So again, the argument goes like this. He's the center of a major national story. People are widely discussing him and his role, and therefore he has become a public figure for purpose of this controversy and must prove actual malice instead of negligence. Public figure that you made public. Let's not forget that. The case itself was public, but the people are not. He did not put himself on screen and started talking and putting himself in the public. He didn't do that. He didn't leave himself open for criticism and all this other stuff. He got brought into it. And when you want to bring someone to the public light, then there should be an effort at some level to protect that individual because they did not go out there willingly at that point. And again, we're talking about people who haven't done anything wrong, or at least at this point have not done anything wrong. That matters because even this is what the news does. Let's say, God forbid, he was responsible later on. I'm not saying he is, but bear with me. Let's say he was. All they'll say is, told you, we got our story. We were right the whole time. It doesn't matter because you weren't right at that moment because you didn't have enough evidence to say you were right. That's the key. It's funny how they could pull a story with very limited evidence, but if we did the same thing, we'd be gone. Imagine if you interviewed me, a law enforcement professional, and you're asking me questions and I give you just ambiguity like you give me, nothing that you could lean on. But yet you could do the same when you're reporting. I mean, that's not balanced. That's not fair. Why this matters? So the ethical problem you're zeroing in on is Banfield's own reporting was a big part of what dragged him into that spotlight. Before she named him, he was effectively unknown to the broad public. After she named him as a prime suspect, he's everywhere in true crime conversations and comment threads. So in contextual terms, she's trying to use the public status. Could be, I'm not saying she is, but she could use the public status she helped create to claim stronger legal protection for herself. So it becomes actual malice standard, First Amendment weight, while he loses protection as a private person. And that feels backwards. The more damage your coverage does to his anonymity, I hate that word, you know what I mean. That word, anonymity, that word always gets, but you know what the word is. The harder it becomes for him to get a remedy. Now, from a pure legal doctrine perspective, courts look at whether someone voluntarily injected themselves into public controversy. And from a contextual angle, 5 perspective, you can say he didn't voluntarily eject themselves. He was placed in the public narrative by her and others, and using that imposed visibility to label him a limited purpose public figure is ethically suspect. How this interacts with her protective reporting argument, her defense is strongest if the topic is a public issue, which it is, and the subject is a public or limited public figure, and that's what she'll argue, and she relied on official or high-level sources. The counter for us is, yes, it's a public story. Yes, journalists need breathing room, but we shouldn't let someone turn a private person into a public figure by branding them prime suspect and then use that very publicity as a legal shield. That's not what public figures doctrines was built for. Question that was sent me was, given that wasn't a public figure until she named him, should her protected reporting argument really get the benefit of treating him as a limited purpose public figure? If it ever goes that deep, we don't know. But if it ever goes that far, you know me, I do stuff that's like chess, six steps ahead. Contextually and ethically, no. While she can make that argument in court, the better view is that he never voluntarily stepped into this controversy or sought public influence. He visibly is a side effect of her choices. Using that imposed visibility to raise his burden from negligence to actual malice twists the idea of limited purpose public figure. So even if her reporting has legal protection as speech on a public issue, it's not convincing to say he should lose private figure status just because she put him in the spotlight. Then we want to talk about reckless reporting, because that was mentioned by the sheriff. Sheriff rebuke and why it matters. So Sheriff Nanos publicly called the suspect labeling reckless and emphasized that the person named could be a victim. It's not a mild "we disagree." It's an unusually sharp rebuke from a lead investigator about a journalist's framing. When the chief law enforcement officer on the case is publicly begging media to be careful with suspect labels, it raises the ethical bar for anyone covering the story, especially someone with Banfield's experience. And I want to mention, again, just to reiterate, that matters because once he said that, then they go into defense mode about their story, which means they keep his name, Tommaso, still in that dirt, still in that mud. So even if they wanted to argue all the stuff beforehand, you could still get, well, you had the lead authority document clearly in a conference saying that there were no suspects, that he was not considered a suspect, and then you go and continue to defend your narrative. And I think that could be a concern now. So timing and reliance on a single source. So she went out with prime suspect language early based on one anonymous source at a stage where law enforcement apparently had not formalized any suspect designation. And in an active fluid case, that's precisely when names should be used most cautiously. After Sheriff Nanos said on the record that his office had no suspect and that such labeling was reckless, continuing to present Tommaso as a prime suspect or even maybe prime suspect looks less like honest miscommunication and more like a choice to privilege her anonymous source over the official accountable voice. So again, what they didn't mention in the Megyn Kelly show is, okay, but when the source said, when the lead of the investigation said, hey, he's not a suspect, why'd you still continue to defend it? And then what do? They attack the credibility of the agency. So elements of the coverage, for example, the way cameras and the scene were described and stunning new twist framing appear designed for maximum drama. That's not automatically wrong, but when paired with a thin, disputed factual basis for naming a private prime suspect, it crosses from compelling storytelling into sensationalism about a real person's life. And yes, guys, we all know the immediate direct contacts. I did a show on this, could be suspect, but they said prime suspect. That pulls that person out of the group. It's a lot different. We all expect the people closest to the person to be looked at. But when someone adds that word prime, you tell me that doesn't bring a little more to that person than the rest of them? So ethically, you and your audience can ask, does framing a family member as prime suspect on national platforms without official confirmation risk distorting public tips? So anyone is focused on him, everyone becomes focused on him instead of the kidnapper, making witnesses less likely to come forward if they think the case is already solved in the media, and pressuring investigators to respond to media narratives instead of following their own leads. So even if the coverage doesn't legally obstruct justice, it can skew the ecosystem around the investigation in ways that don't help find Nancy and may actually hinder the search. I'll tell you something, one thing about the media in this case is they gave up so much information of stuff that's happening that the law enforcement lost their element of surprise. And to sit there and bastardize people, maybe they're not the best, I get it, but come on, guys, you didn't help them. That Brian Enton's still out there. Yes, he's the best. Yes, but he's giving us a lot of information that we may not really need to know. Because at this point here, the police, they can't, they got no element of surprise. Everybody, and I like how Brian does this show and then pops this one story out about that people could be watching us do this. That puts him in the mainstream because he loves that. You know, because Brian Kohlberg on his phone, they found that he was watching you, Brian. Oh, my God, I was watched by Brian Kohlberg. I was putting it on the news. Let everybody know that Brian Kohlberger was watching my excellent reporting. And then it says it here. In this, you know, they could be watching the kidnappers. Hey, guys, they could be watching what I'm doing. Oh, my God. But then you still keep reporting. You should know it's obvious they're going to be very interested in the case they'll be watching, and everything we did was destroy the element of surprise. Maybe the reason why we can't catch them right away is because they know everything from watching what you are doing. So I get it. Put you in the spotlight. I get it. But in the end, you're taking away the element of surprise that law enforcement needs to catch these guys. Even Savannah, who's in the media, I think she realized right now the conflict that these cause. And she's mad at Banfield. I guarantee you she's got to be somewhat mad with that connecting group. But I don't want us to get so blindsided. He's giving us information, but should we get that information? I mean, he literally did a video, guys. I won't show you. I'll just show you the name of it. But it's funny if we think about it. If we think about it, just take a second to think. It's not meant to be an attack. Just take a second to think. He did an episode. Maybe it was a short. He did an episode, guys, where he basically said that he knows that they're watching him too. Oh, right here. Right here.
Selling your car is a
let me show you something, guys. And it's not, I don't want it to come off as an attack, okay? Because it's not. I just want to open up our eyes to something. So let me actually show it on this screen. Hold on. You know, I am passionate about this because in the end, you want Nancy found. And if Savannah Guthrie wants to sue, I think she has the right to sue. And she shouldn't be deterred because people that are her friends are coming out, Ashleigh's friends, giving advice, making it look like it's objective, but it's not. I mean, if anything, at least we can discuss this. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm trying to figure this out. But look at watch this. Again, I know some people are a major fan of Brian, and I get it, provides a lot of information, but just be open to this, please.
40 long days since 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie went missing from her Arizona home. And while we still haven't learned who allegedly kidnapped Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie's mother, we have learned something else. We have learned a pretty astounding revelation about another case that you're probably familiar with and may now relate to what we're talking about, because it turns out News Nation viewers aren't the only ones who think that Brian Enton's reporting is top-notch, because apparently quadruple murderer Brian Kohberger is also a fan of our...
Guys, what are we doing here? Guys, if you can't see that as sensationalism or putting someone at the center of something, we would have to assume that if you did, some people are going to be watching the news, the people that did it. And if you know that, then stop giving out the information. It's purely for views. You're giving out information that destroys the element of surprise. So all this really is in my mind, I could be wrong, but this isn't about, we should know that they watch these things. Brian Kohberger was into criminology, all that stuff. We know he was probably on top of things and wanting to know the methods and all. Some of them inject themselves in the cases. So why would we not think that they're watching the media to see what the latest leads are? Every time, anytime, even people escape from prison are watching me. They want to know because they know the media is going to release it. And then it's sad, but then the law enforcement has to battle the media, has to battle the people that are doing the crimes. It just, there's so many elements that they have to go at once. And then they get judged when they make mistakes. Well, they're dealing with a lot more obstacles than we could even imagine. And then we do this through the media with the element of surprise. We ruin it. And this is really about him being center. Oh, Brian Kohberger was watching me too. Or, they must be. This has nothing to do. We know this. This is just, in my mind, putting you in the center. And if people can't see that, I don't get it.
Intrepid reporter. You see, Kohberger was apparently watching videos of Enton covering his case before he was ever arrested for the brutal murders of 4 college students, which I got to say, more than a little frightening, right? But it does raise an interesting question. Could Nancy Guthrie's alleged kidnapper also be watching Enton's coverage of this crime?
Guys, I'm just saying, what is that question? How obvious? I mean, of course they're going to be watching it, but this wasn't asked out of curiosity. This was asked so they can answer the question by putting someone center in the spotlight. Watch.
He's been on the leading edge of every new development, so it would make sense that whoever took Nancy has been following him in hopes of maybe staying ahead of investigators, right? Joining me now for more on this revelation, this strange revelation, is News Nation senior national
Did
correspondent.
you see what he said real quick? He said they're watching him because he does all the updates, which could keep him ahead of the investigation. Well, if you know that, then why are you still releasing the updates that do that? If you know that the stuff he reports could keep people ahead of the investigation, then why do we continue to report it? Come on, man. Sorry.
Brian Enton. Brian, my gosh, how did you learn that Kohberger was following you?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is kind of creepy to think about. I guess I wasn't that surprised, but the way I learned about it is because remember the digital forensic expert.
So like I says, he wasn't that surprised, which means he knows exactly what he's reporting. He knows exactly how it affects law enforcement doing their job. So he's not that surprised. Plus a little ego, maybe. Oh, my reporting is that good, but he's not that surprised. What does that tell you guys? Come on, be fair. Be fair that he knows what he's reporting, and he knows that the bad guys are watching it, and he knows it just destroys the element of surprise for law enforcement, which is what they need. They need the element of surprise.
To get ready for trial with Celebrate, they actually told me, like, hey, just so you know, he was watching your videos. He was following your reporting, and they actually sent me a screen grab. You know, they used the software to pull the information off of his phone, and there was me, a picture of me doing one of my videos.
This is it. We're showing it right here.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that they sent me. And I haven't really talked much about it. I found this out months ago. Just because, I don't know, I guess I maybe tried to put it out of my head. It just kind of creeped me out. But again, I mean, I guess I'm not that surprised considering much like with Nancy Guthrie, I was there for months. I was outside the house every day. I was covering every little update. And
maybe he didn't say it right away because he knew that reporting could have been interfering with the investigation. But guys, this is really just putting him in the limelight.
I've been doing the same thing here. So I guess, you just kind of have to assume whoever did it is probably, trying to take in all the coverage.
So now that thinking about it, processing it, how does it make you feel knowing he's watching your coverage?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I think I just try to block it out. I mean, I just try to focus on the job and obviously just getting the facts every day and reporting. And I think if I thought about it too much, it would probably just freak me out too much. So I think maybe that's why I haven't talked about the Kohberger thing until now, just because I didn't want to think about it much. And it's the same kind of thing with whoever did this to Nancy Guthrie. There is some new information I found out today, though, Jesse, that kind of relates with Nancy.
I know we talked about that, but again, you guys got to see that, hopefully. So beyond the investigation, there is the human damage. Neighbors, coworkers, and friends see a man they thought they knew suddenly cast as a prime suspect because it affects on family and community. And even once law enforcement clarifies that he's not a suspect, some people only remember the sensational version, that the permanent stain of this kind of reporting. And again, it's the initial impression matters, guys. It's powerful. So report that investigators are looking closely at everyone around Nancy, including immediate family, without naming individuals who have been formally identified by law enforcement. That's responsible. You could say that. We talked about that. If you learn that a specific family member has been questioned or their property examined, you can describe that without using the prime suspect label unless officials do so publicly. Use strong disclaimers. At this stage, law enforcement stresses that no one is a suspect. Everyone is being interviewed and checked. This gives you the viewers a clear contrast. Banfield's choice jumped to a named prime suspect narrative, and the ethical choice focused on the process and range of inquiry without branding individuals. So even if it's legally protected, so here's a question was asked, even if it's legally protected, was this ethically reckless? And I put yes, in multiple ways it was ethically reckless. One, you name a private, previously unknown person as a prime suspect based on one anonymous source, and then you continue leaning on that framing after the sheriff publicly said there was no suspect and called such labels reckless. Present the story with dramatic packaging that amplified suspicion without matching evidentiary support. Even if a court ultimately shields her speech under the First Amendment, from a professional ethics standpoint, this is exactly the kind of conduct that undermines trust in both media and true crime coverage. Now, I get it, guys. Some people are Banfield fans. I see a lot that was helping her with this side of the argument. I wanted to do the opposite for Savannah because I didn't see many people doing it from that perspective. So I wanted to provide another perspective before that goes blindly. I still got more, guys. Hold on, it closed off by mistake. Give me a second. So I'm kind of doing this for Savannah's behalf because I didn't see anything on her behalf, to be honest with you. So I wanted to give it a try. This way, maybe next time they do something, and then they can clarify it and put some of this stuff in their angles. So I want to talk about the detective leaks and the sources. So how Banfield might deflect blame. We talked about this. If pressure mounts, Banfield and her team can try to shift focus towards law enforcement by saying, and we saw that with the other lawyer, I didn't invent this. I reported that a law enforcement insider told me. There's a problem. It's that someone in the department leaked inaccurate or premature information. In other words, she can argue, don't blame the messenger, blame the leaker. Why that doesn't erase your responsibility, and it says your point is important here. I added this. Everyone in journalism and true crime know there are official channels, public information officers, press conferences, on-record statements, and unofficial leaks. By definition, a leak means you're not hearing from the main accountable source. You're hearing from someone on the side, off the record, and that should heighten skepticism, not lower it. So even if the leak did come from inside law enforcement, she still had a responsibility to check it against official channels, especially once the sheriff started speaking publicly. When the official on-record source directly contradicts the leak, no suspect, the ethical move is to reevaluate and, if necessary, pull back on naming names. The verification step that you're emphasizing. So basically, I'm essentially saying if I get a leak, I should verify with the main source before I go public, especially if I'm going to drop a private person's name. How does that apply here? Once you knew there was a leak, the next step should have been, let me check this with the primary spokesperson or with more than one insider. If the main official source says no suspect and calls the suspect labeling reckless, that should have triggered a reset of her framing. What this means for responsibility, so in angle 7, you're drawing a line. Law enforcement bears blame for any inappropriate leaks, but Banfield still bears responsibility for choosing to publish leaked anonymous suspicion as prime suspect language, failing to record that leak, or failing to reconcile that leak with the official contrary statements, and keeping his name in that frame even after being told publicly to be careful. She can't fully offload that onto the leaker. A leak is a starting point for verification, not a final authorization to name private suspects. Question that was asked was, if Banfield got this from a leak, can she fairly push most of the blame onto law enforcement for leaking it? She can point to law enforcement as part of the problem, but she can't escape her own duty. Leaks are by definition unofficial and often untested. Ethical reporting means treating leaks as tips that must be checked against official channels, especially before naming a private person as prime suspect. So yes, the department should answer for any inappropriate leaking, but Banfield still owns the decision to amplify that leak, attach a name, and maintain that framing after the sheriff publicly contradicted it. So in closing, for me and other true crime creators, this whole situation should tighten our standards, not just our opinions. A few closing points that I can say directly to camera. This is for us. If someone's not already a public figure, we have to assume our coverage might be the first time the world hears their name, and that's a huge responsibility. Leaks are not green lights. A leak is where our verification starts, not where it ends, especially if we're going to put a private citizen's name next to words like suspect or prime suspect. And I've learned this throughout the process too, and you could see that I do my best to report what's correct. And I think most people that follow my channel follow that. The law might protect a lot of what we can say, but our ethics have to decide what we should say. Our job is not to beat law enforcement to naming a suspect. It's to inform without destroying people who may be innocent. So if this case does anything for the true crime space, I hope it forces all of us, including me, to slow down before we attach a name to a narrative, because the people we talk about have to keep living in these communities long after the episode ends. I want to show you something. When Tommaso's name was first mentioned by Banfield, I did a short. I want to show you something. I want to show you this short that I did. Just give me a second because I do a lot of shorts. So I'm gonna have to search it up. Hold on one second. I hope I can find it. Let me just do one more try because I do a lot of shorts. I want to show you something. I think this may be it. Right here. About 1 month ago and change, I asked the question, is Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law a suspect? And this is when I first started understanding the importance of be careful what you say, because it's something I felt. Sometimes I don't have to look at ethic policy. I just feel that something doesn't feel right. So I go with my instinct. But listen. Hey guys, so I'm just following up on some of my comments from the video we did yesterday on the Nancy Guthrie case. So everybody's talking about the brother-in-law, Thomas, the one who is married to Annie. That would be Savannah's sister. So that would make him the son-in-law of Nancy. And everybody's saying that he could be a suspect based on what someone had dropped from the media, saying that it's connected to the information comes from some law enforcement personnel. I mean, I can't say he is or he isn't, but I've been doing my research, and he's not showing up as a suspect at all. The law enforcement said the last person to see Nancy was Annie. It doesn't mention if her son-in-law or Annie's husband. Remember, this was older, though. This is before they found out it was Sione, but still, the premise is here. He was not mentioned at the time. Was with them. It clearly just says Annie, and that's coming from official reports. I at this point, there's really just not enough to lean on to say that he's a suspect. I don't know where this other information is coming from. I mean, there was one source that said he's absolutely not, but then when I digged in a little further, there really wasn't any validity to that source. And the only source that's coming right now that says he is a suspect is, I think it's Ashleigh Banfield. So maybe she knows something that we don't know, but the official sources do not note him. They don't even note him as the last person to see her. I'm not saying he couldn't go back and do something foolish. I know they're from the Tucson area as well, but right now there's nothing to say that he officially is. Also, I have another concern. So, and that's when I was relatively just learning the case. That was before they said that he was the last person to take her home. But I felt like, what about that was me? And when I was in my car that morning going to work, I saw all the comments and I said, where are they finding this from? And I actually stopped the car, pulled it over, and there was just nothing there. So I trying to figure out how this game works. I've gotten better over time. I just basically said, I don't see that. So I felt I had to provide the other perspective and still try to do it in a manner that's respectful. But then as I don't know so much that's really so little. So it does get a bit frustrating, So I just wanted to put this out there because, again, I'm learning as we go. But I thought this was an interesting dialogue. I would love your thoughts. It's a long one, but if you like the content, don't forget to buy me a cup of coffee. Link to that in the description as well. Top of the channel. All right, guys, stay safe.